This is Sunday Night Safran. I'm John Safran. Over there is Father Bob Maguire.
Yes.
Joining us from a little studio in Bristol in the United Kingdom is a very famous man who, amongst his scene, is very well regarded, Graham Hancock, author of Fingerprints of the Gods.
There's exciting things.
And he's going to be doing a Origins of Consciousness Tour 2012, an exploration into spirituality, psychedelics and ancient civilizations. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Now, before we get into this conference, what was your spiritual upbringing? Like, were you from a religious family?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was brought up in a Christian family. My grandfather was a minister of the church and actually traveled to Iran in the 1920s and tried to convert them to Christianity. My father was a medical doctor, a medical missionary. I spent my childhood in a mission station in India. And like all sensible children, I rebelled completely against my parents and their point of view, defined myself as an atheist from about the age of 16, and it was only much later in life that I realized that how complicated and mysterious reality is, and that it's possible to disbelieve in the archetypal figure of God and yet to believe in spirit realms and spirit worlds, and that indeed that life may go on after the physical death of the body. So I would say I have arced back into a spiritual perspective, but definitely not an orthodox mainstream Christian perspective at all.
And what kind of things were you reading, or what kinds of people were you meeting, or even what type of psychedelics were you taking to start, travelling on this journey from being an atheist to being more spiritual?
Well, it actually started for me with an intense interest that I had for many years in ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians put their best minds to work for 3,000 years on the mystery of what happens to us when we die. And they came to certain reasoned and deeply worked out conclusions about this, that life does not stop with physical death, that it goes on, and that we must account for everything that we've done in this precious opportunity of life that we've been given to be born in a human body. Did we use it well, or did we waste it? Our society today really has very trivial interests and concerns, largely to do with material matters and production and consumption, but the ancient Egyptians were deep thinkers on these matters. So I think that was the beginning of a spiritual quest for me, in a very with the wise guidance of a 3,000-year culture that investigated nothing else more deeply than this matter. Then, as my own writing career moved on, and I became interested in human origins, and I wrote a book called Supernatural, which really touches on a very strange moment in the human story long after our ancestors became anatomically modern, and really quite recently, just about 40,000 years ago. It was though a light was switched on in the human brain all over the world at once. Our ancestors had been incredibly dull. I mean, I call the story of human evolution 6 million years of boredom, as a matter of fact. But suddenly, about 40,000 years ago, they became incredibly interesting. And this is the moment that they start creating the great cave art and rock paintings all over the world. And to cut a very long story, very short indeed, the best evidence of the inspiration for this cave art and for very specific characteristics of the cave art is that it is an art of altered states of consciousness, that our ancestors were literally tuning in and turning on, that they were taking psychedelic plants. In Europe it was undoubtedly psilocybin mushrooms, and that these were opening up whole realms of experience to them that they had never known before, and that they construed these experiences as contact with spirit entities and spirit beings and spirit worlds. And what's interesting, whether they were right or wrong in that construal, what is interesting is that this is the moment that human culture took a gigantic leap forward. And it suggests that we may be very foolish as a culture to rigidly refuse to consider the realms of experience that psychedelics responsibly used open up. I mean, I would be the first to say that psychedelics are extremely serious business. Nobody should be doing powerful psychedelics for recreational purposes.
What are some of the psychedelic drugs that our listeners would have heard of?
Well, dimethyltryptamine, DMT, is one of them. Of course, everybody's heard of LSD, which will give you a 12-hour journey. Dimethyltryptamine, taken in pure form, will send you on a rocket ship to another world for 12 minutes. And really, within seconds of smoking the dimethyltryptamine in a pipe, you completely lose contact with this reality, and you find yourself in another realm where it appears that intelligent entities are communicating with you, and it can sometimes be extremely frightening and scary. Now, good scientific research has been done on this at the University of New Mexico by Dr. Rick Strassman. And what's interesting is that his volunteers who were given DMT, although they were not comparing notes, all met the same entities and were told the same things. In fact, several of them were even told, "We're so glad you've discovered this technology. Now we can communicate with you more efficiently." So, and it's really, normally when large numbers of people have the same experience and are not comparing notes, that suggests to us that the experience may be real, and it may be that the receiver wavelength of the brain is being altered by these substances and giving us access to other levels of reality normally closed off to our senses. That's one exciting possibility that arises from this research.
Are you saying it's akin to if we went to another planet and we found aliens or something, communicated with them? This is like another version of that.
Except I would suggest that what we're dealing with here is other dimensions of reality rather than other physical aspects of this dimension.
But you're not saying it's just in the imagination. You're saying people are actually travelling in some sense to another dimension.
Their consciousness is, and I'm not the only person who's saying that. Many of the scientists who are doing research in this stunningly interesting field of consciousness have coming to the same conclusions, that those realms that quantum physicists call parallel universes may be accessed by through consciousness change.
And what's like one of either the most colourful or even the most scary experience you've personally had with meeting someone or something from another dimension?
Well, last year, after having had one astonishingly terrifying DMT journey in Utah, in the southern United States, I flew to Brazil and had 5 sessions of ayahuasca over a period of 2 weeks. Ayahuasca is an ancient sacred brew that is used in the Amazon to induce altered states of consciousness, and it happens that its active ingredient is dimethyltryptamine. And in this series of 5 sessions, and the DMT trip that preceded it, enormous focus was put on my own behavior. I had been smoking marijuana for 24 years prior to that. It was an absolutely central aspect of my life. I never thought that I would give it up, and I felt it was fundamental to my writing. But it had, in the latter years, begun to induce changes in my behavior. It had made me very paranoid, very negative towards my partner, very distrusting. And suddenly, in these series of 5 ayahuasca sessions in Brazil, I found intelligences focusing on me and making me understand that I was poised on the edge of an abyss, and that if I carried on abusing marijuana in the way that I had been doing in recent years, I was going to be doomed. And when I came back to England, I actually tried to smoke marijuana again, but I found I couldn't. And for me, this is a kind of miracle. I've not smoked now for a year. A 24-year non-stop marijuana habit was interrupted overnight by the intervention of a powerful psychedelic in Brazil, and the sense that an intelligence in the Amazon, they call her Mother Ayahuasca or Our Lady of the Forest. She often appears as a gigantic serpent, sometimes as a beautiful woman.
Did she appear as a gigantic serpent to you?
She absolutely did, and opened her jaws and swallowed me up, and gave me this understanding that I was going down a wrong track in my life. I don't want to put marijuana down because I believe it's a very healing herb, and properly and responsibly used, it can be very helpful. But I had abused it 24 years from 9 o'clock in the morning until midnight that day, smoking all day. You can do this as a writer; nobody's watching what you're doing, you know. And I had stopped respecting that plant, and it had turned me into a rather negative person. And I've been relieved of that burden thanks to the intervention of this extraordinary psychedelic, which, by the way, ayahuasca, which the active ingredient is DMT, has been used in the Amazon for thousands of years. There's archaeological evidence of its use going back more than 4,000 years. It's considered a healing entity. It addresses fundamental issues in our lives, presents us with the truth about ourselves, and gives us the opportunity to change if we're willing. And it's not easy to make these changes, but at least it gives us the chance to do so.
Now, we're just going to quickly go to a song and be back with more after this.
Sunday Night Safran
on Triple J.
Coming up on Sunday Night Safran, we'll meet a writer who will expose the brutality behind Australia's once-cherished White Australia policy. And shortly we'll talk to a young female comedian about plunging into the world of comedy. John.
This is Sunday Night Safran. I'm John Safran. That's Father Bob Maguire over in Bristol.
Stunned.
We have been talking to Graham Hancock, who's going to be coming to Australia for his Origin of Consciousness tour and talk about the exploration into spirituality, psychedelics and ancient civilizations. Now, just before the song, you were talking about one vision and experience that someone can have is a giant serpent. What are like some of the other like archetypal symbols or animals that you can experience or that you have?
Very often with ayahuasca is the visionary substance that I am most experienced with. I've been drinking ayahuasca since 2003. I've done more than 40 journeys with ayahuasca now. I usually go to South America, to the Amazon, to Brazil or to Peru in order to drink it. It's interesting that people all around the world, there's been a huge study done on this by Benny Shannon, who's the professor of psychology at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. People all around the world who drink ayahuasca, whether they drink it in Tokyo or New York or London or the Amazon itself, do most frequently encounter serpents. Intelligent serpents, often of enormous size, that seem to communicate with us telepathically. But sometimes that entity, which appears as a serpent, can morph into a jaguar, kind of panther.
And is there any connection with that serpent and the serpent in the Old Testament?
Well, yes, I think this is, you've raised a very interesting point. You know, we've been given one take on the Old Testament story, which is that the serpent was the bad guy, the devil, who led mankind astray. But there was an early form of Christianity called Gnosticism, which turned the Garden of Eden story upside down and said that actually the serpent was the good guy, and said that this entity that we call Yahweh, that we call God, isn't really a god at all. He's a kind of demon who is pretending to be God, who has led mankind astray. And the purpose of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, according to the ancient Gnostics, was to liberate us through knowledge from the tyranny of this demonic entity. And I must say, if you look at the behavior of all three of the mainstream religions in the world today, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the fear, hatred, and division that they engender, the terrible things they do, the stoning people to death, the burning at the stake that Christianity used to do until 200 or 300 years ago, it does actually seem to be the work of a demonic entity, not of a loving God. So perhaps the Gnostics were right, and perhaps we've been conditioned to believe the serpent is the bad guy. But certainly in the Amazon, the serpent, Mother Ayahuasca, is seen as a healer and a guide and a teacher of mankind.
Does Benny Shannon, is he the one who talks about how Moses and the children of Israel, they may have been consuming ayahuasca, and that's
Quite
why
right.
That's why at Mount Sinai they had those visions of seeing God?
You're spot on. Moses and the burning bush. Of course, it wasn't ayahuasca. The specific ingredients of ayahuasca are only found in the Amazon. However, there are plants in the Middle East which do contain those ingredients. And it is possible, according to Benny Shannon's research, that Moses was on an ayahuasca-type trip. You would call it an ayahuasca analog using Syrian rue and one of the mimosas to produce the DMT and the monoamine oxidase inhibitor that are also found in the Amazon in different plants.
And what do you think about those other theories that everyone from Joseph Smith, from the Mormons, to Muhammad from Islam were also on some sort of psychotropics or psychedelics?
Well, of course, you don't have to have a psychedelic substance. It's possible to induce an altered state of consciousness, a trance state, and that's what's fundamental by other means. For example, by fasting for long periods of time. For example, by meditation. For example, by sensory deprivation. Muhammad was in a cave when he encountered the entity that he construed as the angel Gabriel, who gave him the text of the Quran. I think if you scratch all of the mainstream, and caves, by the way, are the classic sensory deprivation territory, I think that all of the mainstream religions, if you scratch them deep enough, you will find a shamanic altered state of consciousness experience. St. Paul on the Damascus Road, for example, Moses at the burning bush. And what's happened is that, unfortunately, past that early direct contact with the divine, if you like, with the realm of spirit, what happened was within hundreds of years or less that the money men and the bureaucrats came in, and the churches were taken over by the dead hand of bureaucracy, and they became, instead of liberating influences, they became dominating influences, and they were literally, if the Gnostics were right, hijacked by a demonic force presenting itself as God, pretending to be God. You know, in that film, The Usual Suspects, there's the saying that the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince mankind that he never existed. Well, maybe it's even worse than that. Maybe the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince mankind that he is God.
Now, when you come to Australia, I hope you're going to talk like that.
You bet.
That'll stir them up.
Well, I think people need to think about this. You know, we accept with our mother's milk without ever questioning all the precepts of what is called religion. We're just told to think. We never actually engage our brains and really consider what religion is telling us to do. But I say, you know, don't listen to so much to what religion today says. Look at what it does. And religion today is one of the greatest instruments of division, of hatred, of fear, and of suspicion in the world. And it's time we changed our relationship to it. We need direct contact with the realm of spirit. The sickness of the West comes from the fact that we've severed our connection with spirit, but we're not going to reconnect to it through the mainstream religions. They are agents of chaos and confusion.
Now, I saw a thing on YouTube where you had a very polite, because I thought it was going to be a fight, a very polite and interesting back and forth with Richard Dawkins, where he said that, yeah, sort of what you're saying is right, except for he just thinks it's our brain making up all these things as opposed to going to the other dimensions.
Yeah, that's on my YouTube channel. I took the opportunity of Richard Dawkins coming to my city, Bath, in the southwest of England, to join an audience at a talk he was giving called The Magic of Reality, and to question him about his views on reality. And really what I challenged him to do was to take a major psychedelic, really to have a serious psychedelic experience. I would like him to have 5 sessions of ayahuasca, actually in the Amazon jungle, officiated by a shaman who knows what he's doing. Richard Dawkins is an incredibly clever man, brilliantly eloquent, but you know, when you get face to face with Mother Ayahuasca, you find that you're confronting an experience rather than an argument, and that experience requires you to reach certain conclusions about it. And I have a feeling that a serious direct confrontation with ayahuasca might cause Richard Dawkins to broaden his view of reality from the limited material plane on which he focuses entirely at the moment.
Now, you're coming to Australia on October 13th.
That's right. In Melbourne's the first gig, as a matter of fact.
So you have a conference on the 13th, you have a workshop on the 14th in Melbourne, then you're going to Sydney on the 21st of October.
That's right. But we're also in Brisbane on the 18th of October and in Byron Bay on the 19th of October.
And people can go to losttribes.net.au and entheo.net to find out more. Thank you very much for spending time with us, and we look forward to seeing you in Australia.